For this project, you're going to need some soil, maybe some clay, and some sand. You're going to need some liquid glue, which you might want to lay on its side so that it comes out of the bottle easier, a pencil, a piece of paper, and maybe some toilet paper or a tissue, something to wipe off your finger because you're going to be getting a little bit of glue on your finger. Go get your supplies and I'll meet you back here. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our pencil and our piece of paper, and we're just going to make a few horizontal, going side to side, horizontal lines on our piece of paper. For this, we're not going to actually keep them as straight as we can, but we also don't want them to be too crazy wiggly. We want kind of a gentle curve to our lines. Think of gentle hills. I have this tiny stick that I grabbed, so this has a really nice gentle curve. We don't want something too lumpy bumpy because we're going to be drawing with our glue and it's a little tricky to do, so we want a nice gentle line that we can draw on. So I'm going to do maybe 4 or 5 of these. So I'm going to do a gentle curve going across my paper, and then I'll do another one here, and maybe this one will get really close together on that side. Yours can look however you want it to look. It doesn't have to look like mine. And then maybe I'll do one like this, and maybe this one will come across and get really close and then go farther away. And maybe I'll do one more little one down there. So there I have some lines. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. Don't do more than 5, but if you only want to do 3, or if you only want to do 4, that's okay. So 3, 4, or 5 gentle wavy lines on your piece of paper. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our glue bottle, and we are actually going to be picking one of the lines that's in the middle. It doesn't have to be exactly the middle. I'm going to pick this large one to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the lines with my glue, and you might want to have a piece of paper underneath your picture so you don't get any glue on the table. I just got a tiny bit on there. Or so that you don't get any of the sand or soil on the table either. So a little scrap piece of paper or even some extra toilet paper would be great for that. Okay, so now I have traced my lines that are in the middle of my paper. Now I'm just going to do a little zigzag or like a curly line with glue. This is a time when you can just kind of draw with your glue bottle right in the center. And I'm going to keep my glue bottle laying down on its side, because if I stand it up, then all the glue goes down to the bottom of the bottle and it takes it longer to come out the spout. But if it's laying down, then it can come out a little faster and it'll work nicer for me. Now's the time when you're going to get your finger a little bit gluey. I happen to have a popsicle stick, so I might try to spread mine with a popsicle stick. If you have a popsicle stick, you can use that too, but you can definitely just use your finger. It'd probably be a little easier. I'll probably end up switching to just using my finger, but I'm going to try this and see how it goes. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that glue that I traced on my pencil line, and I'm going to kind of move it to the center where I put the zigzag. I want to cover in this whole space with glue. I'm trying to cover the whole thing so I don't have any areas in this little spot that doesn't have glue, and I'm going to go all the way across. So I have a little bit of an area right here where I'm having trouble getting enough glue on there, so I'm just going to do another squirt right there, and then I'm going to spread that out a little bit. Okay, so now this whole middle area is covered in my glue. Okay, only in between those 2 lines that I did. And I went outside the line a little bit right there and a little bit right here. That's okay, don't worry about that. We just want to get it in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to set my popsicle stick down. If you used your finger, just wipe your finger off or go and wash your hands if you feel like it. And then I'm gonna pick one of my bags here to fill in this area. But before I do that, I am gonna go get a scrap piece of paper and put it under my picture because I wanna make sure that I don't spill this all over. I wanna use as much of it as I can. Okay, so now I have my scrap piece of paper underneath my page, and I'm gonna pick one of my bags here to sprinkle on. I think I'm gonna start with this one. This is my sand. And what I'm gonna do for this is I would really love to just kind of dump this bag on here. I think that would be really easy. And for this first one, if I did that, it would probably be fine, but I'm not gonna be able to do that after this one. So I'm gonna be really careful. And I'm just gonna sprinkle it on. I don't wanna use the whole bag. I just wanna sprinkle it on top of where the glue is. And if this is too hard for you and it's dumping out all over and making a big mess, then what you should do is you should use your pincher fingers and you should dip into your bag and pinch and sprinkle. Pinch and sprinkle. That's kind of more fun anyway. I'm kind of sad that I didn't do the pinch and sprinkle. It's a little bit more fun than just dumping it. Okay, so I'm trying to keep as much of it right on top of the glue as I can. And then I'm gonna set my bag here, and I'm gonna kind of set my bag down so it stays open a little bit like that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, I got some on my fingers yet, I'm gonna try to get that off. I'm gonna take my piece of paper here, really careful, and I'm gonna kind of fold my paper. I'm not gonna put a crease in it, I'm just kind of bending my paper so that all that extra sand goes to the middle. Then what I'm gonna do on top of my bag here is I'm gonna put my paper just over the top of my bag, and I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake. And I'm gonna try to get any extra sand that didn't stick to the glue back in that bag so I can use it again. I might even take the little bit of sand that I have left here on my scrap paper, again kind of curving my paper to make it fall in the center, and then I'm gonna put it back inside that bag. Now I have more that I can use later, okay? So I'm gonna set this back on top. And you might say, oh, but look at some of those white spots in there. I'm okay with that. If that bothers you, I would suggest that you wait until this glue is dry to add a little bit more glue and put some more on there. But if you really can't wait and you want to try to do it now, you can, but just tiny little drops, okay? Teeny tiny drops. Because what can happen is if you put too much on, maybe I can show you. I put little drops on there. When I touch this with my finger, it's gonna kind of get mixed in with the sand. So it's gonna kind of be stuck, or I'm gonna end up picking the sand up off my paper, and I don't want that. I want it to stay on the paper. So if you're very gentle and you hardly touch it, it'll work, but you will end up getting some sand on your finger. So I suggest, ooh, see I'm having trouble right there. I suggest that you would wait until this is dry if you want to add some more. If I weren't trying to show you, I would have just left that because they were very small spots and it didn't bother me. Because we're thinking about dirt and soil and earth when we're doing this, and what earth is made out of, that all that different kinds of soil. This is representing sand in our soil. Like we have sand at the beach, there's also sand in the soil. That's why when you see ant hills in the sidewalk, they're made out of sand because the ants find all that sand in the soil in our yards. Okay, so now I'm using that pinch and sprinkle like I did before. Pinch and sprinkle. And I'm going to put it over the top, just where my new white glue is that I can see. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to be really careful with this because I don't want to make a big mess and I don't want to wreck my picture. One of the best things about art is that when you practice a lot, you get really good at figuring out how to keep your work area clean, because then adults let you make more art because you know how to clean up after yourself. So you get to make more fun stuff because it's not making a mess that your adult has to pick up after you. So if you can keep your area clean, you'll get to do more fun stuff and messier stuff, which is even better. Okay, so I'm gonna leave this like this because the more I move it around, the more lumpy it's gonna be because the glue is gonna kind of move around a little bit because it's not dry yet. Okay, so what I'm gonna do next is I'm going to add in, I'm gonna pick another row, and I'm gonna pick either the one on top or the one below it. Okay, so either the one on top or the one below is the next line that I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna fill that in. But before I do that, I wanna show you something. And you don't have to do this, but if it's something you have at home and you wanna experiment with, you definitely can. I'm gonna put a small line of glue right there. Okay, just a little bit right there. I'm gonna push this over. And I'm not actually gonna fill in this line. I just wanted to try doing a very thin line of salt, because I have some salt at home and I bet you probably do too. Now there's two different kinds of salt that I have here at my house. I have what's called kosher salt, and this salt, if you look at it, it kind of looks like tiny little rocks. It's really big salt. And then if you have regular salt, like you'd find in a salt shaker, that kind of salt, if I can get some on my hand, we can compare them. That kind of salt is a lot smaller, called finer, okay? So there's two different kinds of salt. These almost looks like tiny little rocks, and this one, it's kind of sparkly, but salt does come from the ground as a mineral that we find in the soil that we can dig up. And so just like clay, just like sand, we find these things in the soil with us. So I'm gonna experiment by putting some of that salt right there on my glue line. So if you have some salt at home and you wanna try this, you definitely can. So I'm gonna try to pour my salt, and again, you can do the pinch thing. I'm gonna try to pour my salt just where the glue is, and then I'm gonna fold my paper so that it falls right on top of that glue. I don't want to get a whole lot in where I put my sand because it might stick because it's still wet. But it'll take a really long time if I wait in between. Okay, so then I'm just going to let it slide off on my scrap paper here. And I think that looks kind of neat like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the next row. And I'm going to use something else. Maybe I'll use my clay for that one. Okay, so I just spread my glue out there, and now I'm going to take my bag and I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing. I'm going to pinch and sprinkle. And remember, I'm trying to keep it on top of where that glue is, because if it gets on top of the sand or the salt, it might still stick. And if a little bit spills, that's okay, because when we dig a hole in the ground, we don't find that all the sand and all the clay and all the dead grass or all the little minerals, they're not all separated into sections like this. Sometimes they are a little bit, but usually when we dig, they just kind of all get mixed together a little bit. So it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, but we do want to be able to see these different colors, kind of creating art using soil and things found in our earth. So I'm pinching and sprinkling, and then I'm going to use that bag to pour my leftovers back in. Okay. Now when I do this time, I'm going to make sure that I don't fold it to the middle because I don't want it to go on top of the sand. So I am curving my paper a little bit, but I'm not letting it fall on top of the sand that I already did. I'm kind of doing it at an angle here so that it falls off the bottom of my paper instead. Kind of tapping it to get off as much as I can. So that was harder to sprinkle on, but it actually stuck on there a lot better. It's a different texture, Okay, I do have a couple little tiny spots that I'll add some more. Right there by the salt, kind of. And right on the edge. And then I'll just shake it one last time. Now for this project, you might want to stop and take a break after you do a couple and let this dry for a little bit. This is a good one to do in little parts because otherwise your paper gets so wet, it makes it hard and then things can stick together. So after you've done maybe 2 or 3 of these, you might want to stop and take a break for a few minutes and let your glue dry for a little while. When you feel comfortable, you can come back to it. So what I've discovered when I'm working with the soil bag is that I kind of have to gently, so gentle, press the soil onto the glue because it's really light and fluffy. So I'm really gently pressing this on here. And I also noticed that I'm using a lot more than I used with the other materials because I'm just, it's very light and it just feels like I should put more on. So I'm interested to see what you guys discover when you're working with these different materials and see how it feels different depending on what you're working with. So I really gently press this on top of my glue and I'm interested to see how that turns out when it's dry. Okay, now some of mine, oops, careful not to touch the other stuff. Some of mine went on top of the other areas. You can see there's little bits of dirt here and stuff, and some of the clay I sprinkled on top of here a little bit. That's okay, because remember, soil is kind of all mixed together. It's not just one thing. So that's all right. So I'm just going to do one last row and then I'm going to be done. And I'm really liking how mine's turning out. I'm being really slow and careful with this. I let it dry for a little bit in between my layers. So I think it's going to turn out really well, but it is going to take a while to dry. I'm going to have to leave it overnight to dry. And I'm going to leave it lay flat. And if my paper starts to curl a little bit, that's okay. We can put something on top to flatten it later. So here I have my finished piece. I think what I'm going to do is I'm not even going to shake off that last bit of sand. I'm just going to leave it lay flat here to dry, and I'm going to leave it just sit right here on top of my scrap paper. But I am going to shift this just a little bit because I want to make sure it's not sticking anywhere. If glue fell off the side, I don't want it to attach to my scrap paper here. So I'm just going to move it gently side to side and make sure it's not gluey or sticking anywhere. And then I'm going to leave this overnight to dry. And then in the morning when the glue is all dry, I'm just going to gently shake it off over the garbage can. One thing you could also do if you have some teeny tiny little sticks, or even like if you take a pine cone, and if you would break one of these little pieces off of the pine cone, okay, you could glue some of these things down onto your paper too if you wanted to. You definitely don't have to, but there's lots of different things that we find in the dirt and in the layers of soil. Just make sure that you're picking things that are so teeny tiny. Like this is a tiny little branch. It's so much smaller than my finger. Because if I were to take a stick and lay this on here, it's not, the paper's not strong enough to hold that. So if I take a teeny tiny little guy here, the tiniest stick ever, I could lay that on top and attach that in. So gentle I'm being, so gentle. Because there's lots of things that are mixed in with the dirt. I could add some teeny tiny little rocks, but the rocks that I have are about this size, and that's just not going to work for a piece of paper. It'll be way too heavy, and it'll look strange that there's a giant rock in here. Okay, so I used some of the kosher salt to make it look like some little rocks. So if you want to add some other tiny, teeny things, you can, but just make sure they're so small that it's not going to be too heavy for your paper. Or you can skip it and just use the different colored layers. It looks really interesting with different colored layers. Can't wait to see what it looks like when it's done. Here I have my finished piece. It looks so interesting with all these different layers of color made out of all materials we can find outside. And there's a lot of different textures on here. I can even see some of it kind of sparkling in the light. Make sure you leave yours lay flat when you're letting it dry so it doesn't get wonky and wobbly. And we want to make sure that we take really good care of this and keep this in a very safe place to give to Mrs. White later.